All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We are opening our 39th session of the Eurasian Online Seminar with Professor Dao. I'll start with a bit of an introduction first about the speaker, and then we'll move on to the talk itself. And at the very end of it, we'll do the Q&A session as well. So, the Department of International Relations and International Laboratory on World Order Studies and the New Regionalism of the National Research University High School of Economics is holding the 39th session of our Eurasian Online Seminar. Our guest today is one of the leading Chinese experts on international relations, Dr. Dao Wei. Dr. Dao Wei is Director of the Center for International Strategy and Security and Professor at the Department of International Relations of the School of Social Sciences at Tsinghua University in Beijing, China. He received his BA and MA from the University of International Relations in Beijing and his PhD from China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Dr. Dao's research expertise is very extensive, covers China-US relations, as well as US security and foreign policy. Dao Wei has been working in China's academic and policy community for more than 2 decades. He's written numerous policy papers for the Chinese government and also published dozens of academic articles in the journals in China, the US, as well as other countries. We're very happy to have you here today. Thank you very much. The talk is going to be about 45 minutes, after which we'll proceed with a Q&A session. Dr. Dao, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Olga, for this kind introduction. And also thank Professor Lukin for inviting me here. It's my great pleasure to participate this Eurasian online seminar. I saw a lot of great speakers before me, and I know we have also a great audience today. So it's really my great honor to be with you, and I look forward for a very vivid discussion, particularly the Q&A part after my presentation. So today, the topic I'm going to talk is China-US relations and the transitional international order. I think I will try to give you a very brief, very big picture of China-US relations and its relations with its linkage with the international order, the transitional international order. Last year marks the 50th anniversary of the Nixon's visit to China. He broke the ice between the two countries, and the two countries have had 50 years of interactions and try to build the relationship. The two countries set up their diplomatic relations in 1979, but the official interaction started now it's 51 years ago. So now the China-US relations, I will say, of course, is in a very difficult shape, probably the lowest point in past 50 years. So the center I work for did a poll, a survey. Here I have that in my, you can see that. This is a public opinion poll we did here in China. About 3,000 Chinese citizens accepted this interview, and one of the questions we asked was about their attitude to some major countries in the world. Do you have a favorable view or unfavorable view? I think we have 9 countries, and also EU as a actors, altogether 9. And for the US, I think they are the last one that China, or the last country that Chinese people like now. So the Chinese who have favorable view to the US now is only about 12.2%. So comparing with 58.4% of Russia. So Chinese ordinary people regard Russia as the most friendly country to China, and the US as least friendly country to China. And the Chinese people who have unfavorable view to the U.S. is about 59%. So almost 60% of Chinese have unfavorable view to the U.S., while only 7.8% Chinese has unfavorable view to Russia. So I use those statistics to show that actually now this is the lowest point of the bilateral relations. You can find similar numbers in the polls that the American organizations did, like Pew Research. They found that more than almost 90% of U.S. or Americans have unfavorable view towards China, so even more negative. So in past 50 years, I think we passed three phases of China-U.S. relations. Phase one was from 1972 to 1989, the end of the Cold War. The second phase was from early 1990s to the year 2017, when Trump became U.S. president. And then after that, after 2017, we are in the third phase of the bilateral relations. So all those three phases are linked to different international orders. So this traces back to my topic today, the China-U.S. relations with the transitional international order. So in phase one, after 1972, the two countries broke the ice and the two sides got closer. The reason was very obvious. That was not because China and the U.S. liked each other, or they felt that they are similar, they are close. No, actually at that time, China was still during the Cultural Revolution, while the U.S. is at that time the White House is controlled by Republicans. The right-wing politicians. So we didn't like each other at that time, but we got very close because the international structure, the Cold War, because in the Cold War, both China and the U.S. Felt that the Soviet Union posed a threat to the two countries. So the two countries broke the ice. So the driving force behind the normalization of China-U.S. relations in 1970s and the 1980s was the international order, that is the Cold War. Of course, in the 1980s, China started the reform and opening up, and from 1979. So China started its economic reform of the market economy oriented reform from that year. So that paved a way for the second phase. I said it's paved the way because in 1980 it's just the initial period of China's reform. But anyway, China started its reform. At the same time, actually, in the West, I think the U.S. and particularly the U.S. and the U.K., they launched their so-called new liberalism period. I think which at that time, U.S. President Donald Reagan and the U.K. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, I think two of them played a leading role in that regard. While China's reform, though China is a socialist country, but Deng Xiaoping's reform, in the spirit of this reform is quite close to what President Reagan and what Prime Minister Thatcher advocate. That was to liberate the economy, to deregulate the market, and try to make the ordinary people be innovative and and liberate their entrepreneurship. So then, because of the momentum of the Cold War and then the reform in 1980s, the two countries, China, U.S., had some kind of honeymoon in 1980. So this is the first phase. So it's basically because of the Cold War. The second phase was from early 1990 to the year 2017. Of course, during that phase, of course, the international order gradually, already actually, because the Cold War ended, so the whole world entered the post-Cold War international order. I think this is basically a U.S. Hegemonic order, and the neoliberalism was the dominant ideology during that period. So in that period, I think the U.S. adopted a so-called engagement strategy towards China, while China tried to integrate into order led by the U.S. So in that part, during that period, I think the U.S. strategy to China have four parts. That the first is interact with China. Second is drag China into the system. The third is try to benefit from that. The U.S. try to benefit from that process. The fourth is try to shape China's future. The U.S. Elite hope China become a country more like the U.S. Well, I said China adopted a policy or strategy, I will say integration. I call it integration. Basically, also four parts. First one is also interaction. We also want to interact with the rest of the world. Second, we want to integrate into the order that led by the US. The third thing is China also want to benefit from this integration. Well, the last point is China want to maintain its own Chinese characteristic. So we always say we are building our socialism with Chinese characteristics. So if we compare those four parts on the US side and on the Chinese side, I think they are very overlapping actually. The first part, from both sides are interaction. US want to interact with China, China want to interact with the US. The second part, US want to drag China in or bring China in, while China want to integrate in. So those two overlapped very much. The third part was the US want to benefit, while China want to benefit too. So in that period, I think both countries can benefit from that process. No matter who benefit more, but I think the two countries did have a win-win history during that time. The last point was conflicting actually. The US want to shape China's future, while China don't want to be shaped. China want to maintain its Chinese characteristic, but we don't know the end game of that engagement and the integration. We don't know whether China will be shaped or China will maintain its characteristics. For instance, in the year 2000, the US believe they will prevail, while China believe that China may prevail. We really didn't know the answer. During that period, I think, of course, that order, that post-Cold War international order, have a lot of problems, have a lot of, challenges for China. For example, China's political system is different from the West, so we always felt that kind of strategic pressure from the US and its allies. While at the same time, sometimes we believe that US foreign policy is too hegemonic. So many Chinese people don't like that. So, for example, the US policy to China, there are many crises and some unhappy elements in that. It's true that that order, that post-Cold War order, was not perfect. But a lot of Chinese still like that order because China benefited a lot from that order. And that order was, generally speaking, based on the rules, no matter how we define that rules, but it's basically a rule-based order. And it's an open order. China can integrate into that order. And it's an order of interconnectedness. So China, during that period, interconnect with the whole world. So interwoven, intertwined together. And China's economy, we know that China's economy grew very rapidly during that period. Actually, China's GDP in 2000 was only 12.8 of that of the US. So basically 1/8 of the US. Well, 20 years later, by the year 2020, China's economic side was about 70%. So China grew from 12% to 70% of the US. And the average income of the ordinary people increased dramatically. I still remember that in the year 2000 at that time, I think my annual income at that time was about maybe $1,500 US a year, I think, at that time. But now, if a student at my age at that time I was about 30. So now a young government employee or researcher at their early 30, I think at least they can have an income of 20,000 a year. So so of course the wealth of the people grew a lot. So that's the reason why a lot of Chinese people still enjoying that period. So during the poll I mentioned at the beginning, we also asked all the ordinary Chinese people their view to the globalization. Are you in favor of the globalization? So I think the outcome is 68% of Chinese, 68% of ordinary Chinese believe that the globalization is in their interest. So they support the globalization. Only 22% of the ordinary Chinese people have negative view towards the globalization. So I can say probably Chinese is the country in the whole world probably have the most favorable view towards the globalization. And we also asked them their views about, for example, the economic opening up, and their views towards having more foreigners working or studying in China, and or like encouraging Chinese students to go abroad, or to carry on the scientific cooperation with foreign countries. I think majority of the Chinese people support that. 91% of Chinese support the economic cooperation and opening up, 91. And 84% of Chinese welcome foreigners to study and work in China. And 75% of Chinese support sending their kids to foreign countries to study, while 92% of Chinese support scientific and technological cooperation with foreign countries. So basically, we have very favorable, positive view towards the globalization, and that was shaped during the second phase. But yes, we benefit a lot. But at that time, during that period, I think China or Chinese has at least two basic questions or concerns about this international order, the US-led new liberalism, new liberalist international order. One is, actually, I can combine the two into one question. That is, can China really grow or develop into a developed country? Developed country in that order. Can China really be successful in that order? So to put it in a more concrete way, I think we had two concerns. The one concern is if we follow that road, can China really break through the so-called center periphery dilemma? Can China really break through and enter the core part of the world order, or the center part of the world order? Or will China only be, always be keeping in the periphery as a developing country? Can China climb up through the value chain? Can China be a well-off society based on per capita basis? Can China be a technological very advanced country? So we don't know. We doubt, because we watch, actually in past 100 years, very few developing countries succeeded in breaking that center and the periphery dichotomy. Very, very few. Maybe Korea, Singapore, and China's two territory.
Could we just, yeah, thank you very much. Right, apologies everybody, we're just resuming the seminar where we left off. Thank you.
Okay, so I will continue. Just now, before we were disconnected, I was talking about the concerns or the questions China or the Chinese people had regarding the old post-Cold War international order and also China-US relations during that period. China, as I said, benefited a lot, but China had some very deep concern that can China really break through that core periphery dichotomy of the international order, and can China be really developed into a developed country, rich country, strong country. A country has not only big economic size, but very be a well-off society on the GDP per capita basis, a technology advanced country, or country with strong military forces, or country with strong big international influence. I think Chinese people were not very confident at that time. We believe that if we the only way China can climb up, for example, the value chain is by to shape our capability of technology. So Chinese government and the party played a role in the economy, try to concentrate the advantage of Chinese side and try to overcome the problem of the market economy or the disadvantage of the market economy. So, but of course, from the American side, from the US side, this is not a market economy. This is, as we said in China, a socialist market economy. So this is one concern. The other concern is we were not very sure if the US will one day try to stop China. If China get too close to its power, comprehensive power or economic size and military power. So if actually I ask myself this question about 15 years ago, I began to ask myself. At that time, I thought maybe the US may want to do that, but they cannot achieve that goal. But today we're already witnessing that the US is trying to stop China, or at least slow China's development to prevent China to be a real peer or competitor of the US. So again, because of that two concerns, because of the question regarding that order, Chinese government played a very important role, try to strengthen the capability of the economy and the society, try to avoid the so-called Latin American trap, the trap of the Latin American. We don't want to be those developing country in South, for example, in South America, that for a very long time still a developing country. At the same time, I think the US had their concerns or their worry about China. That is, China can really increase its capability and grow its economy very rapidly with different economic and political institutions from the US. So from the US side, politically, China is an illiberal country. While economically, the US believe China is not a real market economy. But it's true that China's economy grew very, very rapidly. So the US felt a kind of China threat, not only because of China's size, but because China has different institutions. China has different systems. So all that explained the reason why we are entering the third phase of China-US relations. So since the year 2017, after Trump became US president, I think the bilateral relations entered the so-called, the American side call it strategic competition period. At the same time, I think international order is changing very rapidly. We all know that the post-Cold War international order basically concluded or collapsed in past few years. I think basically there are four things made the international order changed very rapidly. The first thing is in 2016 when Trump win the election, presidential election in the U.S. and in UK they had a referendum for Brexit. So UK and the US are the two countries that I said they invented the new liberalism in 1980s. But now the two countries, I think the signals were very, very clear. Brexit and Trump's victory, I think very clear that nationalism rather than globalization will be their priority domestically. So the US want to make the US great again, and the US and the UK want to take over its sovereignty from EU, controlled by themselves. So this is the first thing. The second thing, 2 years later, in the year 2018, while China-US started the so-called trade war or a tariff war, while China and the US are two biggest economies in the world and also the two major engines for global economic growth, and now the two biggest economies fight against each other over tariff and technology. So we can say that UK and the US were the brain of the old order, while China and the US were the engine of the old order, and now they began to divorce, to decouple. And the third thing is of course the COVID, the pandemic. So because the old order was the order emphasized on interconnectedness, emphasized on openness. But now, but after the pandemic, every country have to close the door. Even today, for example, in China, if I want to travel to the US, it's very hard. We only have now every week we only have 24 flights, 24 direct non-stop flights between China and from China to between the two countries. While before the pandemic, we have over 300 non-stop flights across the Pacific, from China to the US, from the US to China. So only 10% of the level before the pandemic. So this was the third thing changed the international order, and the fourth thing was of course the war in Ukraine. I think after that the whole world I think are dividing into two camps. While the West, the US, Europe, and maybe some northeastern country like northeastern Asian countries like Japan, Korea, they are in one camp, and China, Russia, and some other countries are at least be put in one camp by the West at least. So though we have never China and Russia, we are not allies, but we have some similar views towards the international order. So all those four things changed or transformed the international order. So we are witnessing a new order emerging. While this is a polycentric international order, it's not a unipolar world. At the same time, the globalization has been decreased, I think, or slowed down. And it's been replaced by camps, by two or maybe several camps, and the closeness is replacing the openness, and the national competition is replacing the international collaboration and cooperation. So this is a very dangerous order. In this order, China and the US had very competitive, very negative bilateral relations. This is not something China wants. Actually, to be honest, China liked the old order because China benefited from the order, but the order has gone. While China wants to maintain the stability of China-US relations because we benefited from that, but the US side changed it and imposed this strategic competition to China. So we have to, if because in China-US relations, the US is a relatively stronger side. If the US want to compete, we have no choice, actually. We have to do something, compete. But the challenge for China is if this new order, or if this new China-US relations are aiming to something like camp-based international order, or it's directing to decoupling, then can China really become a country we want in a relatively closed international order? We achieved a lot. We developed successfully in the open order in past 3 or 4 decades, but now the international order is closing, while China has been excluded to some extent. I think Russia has already been excluded, while China is also being excluded to some extent, at least, from the Western world. So can China really, in that difficult situation, can really become a power that we want to be, or achieve as our as the government's goal is the national rejuvenation? Can China achieve that goal of national rejuvenation in a closed world? I think it's to be honest, I think it's hard. It's difficult. So in the past, when the system was open, we worried that maybe in the open system we cannot achieve. But now in a closed system, I think it's even more difficult, because basically 2 things. If we want to gain long-term economic development, I think the only way is to enhance our productivity, economic productivity. This is the only way that you can achieve a long-term sustainable economic development. Well, if you want to increase the productivity, you have 2 ways. One way is innovation, technological innovation. The other is to try to achieve it through the division of labor. If you divide the labor into a supply chain, then every player in that chain can can use their comparative advantage. So with everybody use their comparative advantage, theoretically, this supply chain will be very, very efficient, and the productivity will be quite high. But if you want to be in that supply chain, then you need a globalization. You need interconnectedness. But now, obviously, the world is dividing into different supply chains, or some regional supply chains. So that means every country will suffer from low economic efficiency. Not only in China, I think the Western country will suffer from that too. Well, the other way I said is through technological innovation. Well, today, I think the semiconductor industry showed very clearly, and some other industries like AI and other things, or biotech, I think all imply that if you want to be successful in this high-tech industry, you have to connect with other countries. You cannot, no single country in the world, no matter it's China or Russia or the US, can lead in every aspect of technological innovation. We can be good at some part, while the US can be good at some part, but nobody can win the number 1 in the game. It's just like in the Olympic Games. When we participate in the Olympic Games, you can win some gold medals, but you cannot win all the medals. Nobody can win all the medals. So it needs collaboration, but the US is trying to utilize its advantage to exclude China from these Olympic Games. Then you have another smaller Olympic Games, but probably it won't be very successful on the market. So that's a challenge for China. Can China at the same time, try to keep some kind of collaboration and cooperation with the rest of the world, while at the same time through our indigenous innovation to achieve technology breakthrough in China. I think it's difficult, it's very expensive, but probably we have no other choice. So to sum up, to conclude my presentation, I think China-US relations has experienced a structural change. Nobody is expecting it's to return to the old days. It's impossible. In foreseeable future, China and the China-US relations will be in a difficult shape because this is something structural. Because the two things: one is the power gap between the two countries are narrowing. The other is the institutional differences between the two countries are widening. So, of course, it will be difficult. Well, having said that, we are facing a relatively short window of stability in the coming months, from right now to the end of this year. I think the two countries, the two presidents, President Xi and President Biden, met in Bali, Indonesia last year during the G20, and the two countries started a kind of momentum to stabilize the bilateral relations, but it were interrupted by so-called the balloon issue, or the airship incidents. After 3 or 4 months, since that of course that incident was in February this year. So now I think from very recently, from about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think the two countries decided to resume the this momentum, and we are looking forward for some senior exchanges between the two countries. The China's Minister of Commerce was already visited the U.S. and met with the American Secretary of different departments, while Secretary of State Blinken may visit China very soon, and then followed by Secretary of Treasury Yellen and the Secretary of Commerce Raimondo. So I guess my hunch is the two leaders, President Xi and President Biden, will meet again by the end of this year, maybe in San Francisco APEC summit. And before that, I hope the two countries can work out something to stabilize the bilateral relations. I'm talking about stabilize, to prevent it from deteriorating further. I'm not saying improving it, but to have some kind of set some kind of bottom to these bilateral relations. Then we will face the test of the U.S. presidential election next year, and we don't know the outcome of the election. But I hope that the next president, no matter who he or she is, could continue this manageable competition with China. I think competition will always be there. You can also call it strategic competition. It's always there. It's something unavoidable. But conflict is still, nobody wants a conflict or even a war. And nobody wants an unmanageable conflict. So if we are fortunate enough, maybe we will have a chance to have this manageable competition in the coming years. But if we are not so wise, we are not wise enough, if we are not fortunate enough, we may fall into some kind of conflict or even a war. That will be a disaster for everybody, for China, for the US, and for the whole world. Okay, I will stop here. So I will hand the floor back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Da, for this very insightful conversation about quite possibly one of the hottest topics in the international relations today. So we are calling the audience for some questions at the moment. So traditionally, if you have a question, you either put it in the chat or you raise your hand and we call you out and you ask your question to our speaker. We're happy to start with Professor Lukin's question comment, and then we'll forward it to the rest of the audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I have a question though. I read about China's position in the United States quite a lot, and I have a feeling that China would like, of course, to cooperate with the United States where it's possible, or at least manage the consequences of the U.S. policy, confrontational policy, and at times Chinese policymakers even say that show this kind of cooperative policy as an example to others. But at the same time, it's very difficult, especially at this time, to deal with the United States, because I have a feeling that there is no kind of cohesive policy course. It's very hectic, you know. You kind of talk to one person, and then it turns out that he could not agree with others, and others say something else, or they change their mind, you know, in 2 days. And because there are so many factions in the US policy, and everyone wants to be tougher than others, because it probably pays off at home. So the result is that the general climate in the United States vis-a-vis China is becoming tougher and tougher, or more and more confrontational. So what is China, you think, going to do in this situation? I think, I mean, is it going to try to cooperate, still to cooperate, even in the situation when there are more and more various sanctions against Chinese companies and so on? Or is it going to do something else? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lu King, for this very insightful question. Yes, I agree with you that it's difficult. It's difficult. It's difficult for two reasons. One is the U.S. decision makers are not very cohesive, as you said. There are different factors in the U.S. And for that, the other thing for this difficulty is when somebody is harming you, when the U.S. is harming China's interest, while Chinese policymakers say, I still want to cooperate with the American side. This sounds politically incorrect, right? In every country, so you need to fight back rather than cooperate, because they are hurting you. But I think China has no choice. That's difficult. But do we have other choice? Is a comprehensive confrontation in China's interest? I don't think so. So China, I think, facing this situation, what can we do? I think several things. One is China still want to talk to the executive branch. I think they are, of course, executive branch cannot dominate the whole U.S. foreign policy, but they are still the most reliable forces in U.S. policy circle. It's much harder talk to the Congress. It's basically impossible. There are too many. There are 535, representatives and senators. So first is talk to the executive branch. Secondly, is talk to the business community. I think the business community still want to be in China. Recently, a lot of U.S. American CEOs visited China, and they are trying to. So the buzzword now is de-risking, right? Try to de-risk, but still stay in China. I talked to a lot of American companies here in China. They feel this kind of pressure, so I think their feedback, their response was stop new investment, but still try to live in Chinese market and earn money from here. And Elon Musk was here last week, talked to many Chinese ministers, three ministers in China. So basically, this is the second approach, talk to the business community. The third approach is talk to the so-called establishment. In the US, of course, again, the establishment is, they are facing domestic challenges. But it's hard to talk to the non-traditional politicians. So establishments are still playing the role. And all those talks, I mean, no matter establishment, business community, or executive branch, are the approach of dialogue, of communication. At the same time, we have to do something harsh to deter the US from doing more things. So we have a soft hand, we have the hard hand, tough hand. I think, for instance, China investigated the US company Micro, and to show, I think that's a signal. I think that's a signal to the US side. We can also hurt your interest if you continue to do the similar thing. But of course, we don't want to terrify all the American companies. So I don't think China will do a lot of this thing. But I think China is signaling to the U.S. side, you'd better set a boundary of what you are doing. So the U.S. side is talking about small yard and high fence. In the yard is a sphere that they want to protect for national security reason. That's, for me, that's understandable. Every country have their yard. So okay, if you have a yard, it's okay. But please make sure or clarify where is your fence, the boundary of the yard. Then outside that yard, we can still work together. We can still cooperate. All in all, China's trade with the US last year was $690 billion US dollars. So it was the highest point in history last year. So after, this is the fifth year after the outbreak of the trade war between the two countries, but the trade still growing, 990 billion. So it's not a small number. So there are still, very close tie between the two countries. We still have 300,000 students studying in the U.S. in the American university. We are still the biggest, the source of the number one source of the foreign students in the U.S. So there are still a lot of visits. So I mean, but back to your question, I think we want to use the tough hand to deter the U.S. side, but at the same time, try to, as you described, try to maintain the cooperation where it's possible. So basically, that's our choice. That's our choice because we have no other choice. Comprehensive confrontation is not in China's interest. Of course, it's not in the U.S. interest. So we hope the U.S. side will realize that too.
Thank you very much, Professor Dawei. I also have the question, considering BRICS countries. So how do you assess the role of BRICS countries as the factor that might affect relations between the US and China in the following decade? Thank you.
BRICS, right? You mean BRICS country? Okay. BRICS country are, of course, for China, very important partners because they are emerging powers, and in the future, those countries will be more and more important. So China works with all the BRICS countries closely, including Russia and other countries. But of course, BRICS is not a bloc. So we have some different ideas. For example, India is also, of course, a very important BRIC country, but China and India have some differences over a lot of issues. So, for a very long time, China adopted a non-alliance policy or strategy for decades. That's China's policy. So China really wants get some good partners. I think Russia is one of our best partner, and we have other partners in the world, and those BRICS countries are very important partner because of their size and because of their position. I think their position, maybe sometimes they are different from China, but sometimes they are different from the US. We don't expecting all the country standing with China. I think that's a too high expectation. We just want that all the countries, so long as not all the countries standing with the US, I think that's fine. If the BRICS country play their independent role, if the European countries can play their independent role, make their judgment, sometimes they may agree with the Americans, sometimes they may agree with China, sometimes maybe they will agree with none. I think that's okay. So we are very supportive to a multipolar, I don't like that word, but all I can say a polycentric world. So we want all the country play their role to be independent. So then China will have the room and have the space to grow. I think that's in China's interest too. Yeah, that's my answer to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Thomas Graham. I'm turning on the mic.
Hi, thank you very much for a very thoughtful presentation. I'd like to turn this to a couple of security questions and move away from the economic questions, although they are quite important. The United States, my understanding, has been quite interested in beginning strategic stability talks with China, in particular discussing nuclear matters and perhaps arms control. My understanding is China has resisted that up to this point. Can you see a situation in which China would be prepared to sit down and have those talks with the United States without any conditions, without any sense that we would necessarily come to agreement necessarily, but understanding that it's important to avoid misunderstandings in this area? Second and related question is that China has, as you know, demonstrated some interest in playing a mediating role in the Ukraine conflict. Do you see any possibility for cooperation between Washington and Beijing in bringing this conflict to a resolution that is satisfactory from the standpoint of Moscow and Kiev, and also plays to China's interest as well as American interest?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for these two very interesting questions. Also very difficult question, I will say. The first question regarding the strategic stability, the talk of strategic stability, I think, yeah, I totally agree with you that China is not willing to, China is quite reluctant to talk strategic stability with the US. Because for the very long time, the reason China don't think we are at the, so we only have an asymmetric power, nuclear power comparing with the US and Russia. So we believe that it should be something just between the two nuclear power on the equal footing. I understand that why the US and maybe Russia want China to join that. And theoretically, as an expert, my personal view is, yeah, we need to consider that. But in the foreseeable future, I don't think Chinese government will join that. But having said that, I think we still have something to do that can cultivate the environment that maybe in the future China and the US and Russia and maybe some other countries can really sit down together, talk about the strategic stability. I think two things. One thing is there are some new technology, emerging technologies. I think we can start from that side, right? From the AI and from the cyberspace. So those emerging technology, their influence over the nuclear stability. I think that's something I think China is quite interested in, and it's still at the early phase. So there's no dramatic power gap between China and the US. So maybe we can talk over that. Also, like the in the cyberspace, how to I mean the cyber militarization of the cyberspace and the usage of the nuclear weapon. I think by discussing those issues, we can cultivate the environment and cultivate the habit of this kind of dialogue. The other thing is in China, sometimes Chinese leadership also use the term strategic stability, but when they use that term, I think they refer to different things. They are not talking about nuclear issue. They are talking about a much broader, much bigger issues like no conflict, no war, including crisis management, this kind of thing, and not hurting the other side's so-called core interest. They also use the term strategic stability. For instance, the Chinese government, the Chinese senior leadership may say, stop intervening Taiwan issue. That's part of our strategic stability. So that's totally different from the meaning that the IR community are familiar with. But I think it's also useful to discuss those broader strategic stability issues. Then we can gradually narrowing it down. I think that's another feasible approach that we can, in the future, we can discuss the real strategic stability issue. And maybe by that time, China's nuclear power could be stronger, I guess. Then China will feel even more confident or China may say, now I'm qualified to discuss this issue. But anyway, in the short term, I don't see any possibility. And the second question related to Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine, I think, yes, China want to play some role in that, but we think, first, we believe that this is a very, very complicated issue. And I myself, and I think many of my colleagues, the mainstream view here is that conflict will continue for a while. We hope that conflict can stop as soon as possible, but let's be honest, let's be realistic. I think that conflict could continue for a while, for months at least. Then maybe we can see some kind of ceasefire, something like that. So before that, we don't think China can play a role in that. But we are talking about creating political environment for the peace. So that is, we can do something related to the conflict and make each side, we can communicate to each other, we can talk to each other, then pave a way for the future peace. So in the short run, I mean, in next 6 months, let's say, I think China's approach is cautious. And also we need to think about Russia's feeling. Because Russia is our friend, is our partner. We don't want Russia feel too bad. I mean, China, try to mediate this. I think if we want to play some mediating role, I think at least both Russia and the Ukraine need to say we want you to play that role. We invite you to play that role. If either side, no matter it's Ukraine or Russia, say you'd better not to play that role, I don't think China will do something, very dramatically. So we need to respect the two sides of the conflict. So having said, because of that, given that background, I don't think China and the U.S. can cooperate. We can try to coordinating our role, our views. I think that's something more realistic. We can exchange our view over this conflict. We can exchange our view about the way that how can we achieve a peace. We can try to, make our position similar or get closer. But I don't think China. It's time in the short run. I mean, in the next few months, I don't think China and the U.S. can do a lot of things, particularly when China-U.S. relationship is so bad. I think it's hard. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is from Alexandra Dance. Please.
Professor Da, thank you very much again. We all know that the Shangri-La summit just passed recently this week, and the highlight of this event was that the Chinese and the American representatives officially had no contact on bilateral or multilateral meetings during this forum. So my question is it even necessary for Beijing to keep attending this forum, since it used to be a great platform for exchanging views as a track one dialogue? But nowadays that Russia has been excluded from the forum on all levels, and London and Washington are trying to make it sound more political than to try to establish a decent dialogue on security issues in the regional level, and especially when Washington brings and sponsors participation of Ukrainian defense minister and Lithuanian defense minister, so out of region actors. So I would like to know what's your take on this. Thank you.
Thank you for this very timely question. I think my answer is quite clear. I think China need to participate. China will not give up any chance to talk to others. We can talk about cooperation. We can even talk about competition and confrontation. So even if we want to, we have to confront to each other. We'd better talk to each other to understand the signal clearer. So Shangri-La dialogue, yeah, it's a forum that focuses on Asia-Pacific security issue. I think China should not be absent. And China will be in all those forums, not only Shangri-La, but also Munich, but also Valdai. And you know, we try to attend all kinds of multilateral forum, try to make China's voice be heard. If we are not here, not there, as you said, Russia has already been excluded. If we give it up, then that means that's a meeting, a forum of one bloc. That's something at the beginning I said that we don't like that bloc-based international order. We still want the whole world to be one system. So we won't give the West a chance to shape it into a one bloc versus the other. So that's the reason why we have to go. And our Minister of Defense attended this time. So it's quite a high level delegation from Chinese side. So I think that already show Chinese government's position that is we will be active in all those kind of multilateral forum. That's arena. So we cannot give it up. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Polina Bakulina, who asked me to read this question out loud. The question is, are US sanctions towards China effective? If not, why does US side continue to take actions that threaten their economic development? If yes, are the China's protection measures sufficient? Thank you.
I think it's thank you very much. I think it depends on how we define effectiveness, right? I think put it in a simple way, I think the U.S. sanction is effective. They have some negative impact on China, particularly on China's technology development. They created some trouble for Chinese companies like Huawei. Obviously, Huawei is facing difficult situation in not only in the U.S. They were not in the U.S. market, but they are facing difficult situation in Europe, in other English-speaking countries, and because of the sanction over the chips, that will undermine China's capability to develop for instance, AI technology, which is critical for China and for the U.S. I think the U.S. is hurting our capability to narrow the gap of the two countries' technologies. So in that regard, in that level, at that level, I will say it's effective. But of course, China's economy is still growing, and China is still so. Even if China's economy stopped today, let's imagine the worst scenario. China's economy size is still 70 to 75% of the US. That's still a very big economy. And of course, China's economy won't stop. So I don't think the US sanction can stop China's rise, stop China's development, but it could pose some threat or slow down China's economic development, particularly slow down China's effort to catching up the advanced technology. I think that's something the US is hurting China, and we feel that kind of hurt. While you ask if our protection measures are sufficient, I don't think we have enough protection measures against that, because the US, banned their companies and its allies selling chips to China. What can China do? So of course we can do something to hurt the US, but hurting the US cannot. For example, let's say we can stop supplying their some key, for instance, mineral material. Let's say rare earths or something. We can do that theoretically, but even if we do that, you cannot reverse the sanction. You cannot make the US side feel that I need to lift the sanction to China. So we can. I don't think we have the capability to reverse that. If we impose more similar sanction to the US, if we adopt the American logic to revenge, I think we will accelerate this decoupling process, which is not in China's interest. So decoupling will hurt China's economy further. So we don't want to be decoupled. So that's a reason you can see China is always in some kind of defensive posture. It's not a perfect situation, of course, but sometimes to be angered by the West, or sometimes feel that you are some kind of victim of the Western aggressive policies will make China in a worse situation, will make China further a victim. So a confident country need to do something by its own logic and in their own interest. We will not decide our policy upon the U.S. policy. We will do our judgment by the standard of our own interest rather than the U.S. policy. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a question from Professor Vinogradov. I'm sorry, just a second. Андрей Олегович.
Прочтите, пожалуйста.
Okay. Thank you very much. You've said that China is trying to avoid a bloc confrontation, but don't you think that it already exists? That's the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting question. I don't think it's, at least I don't think there are two blocs. The US want to be, the West country are one bloc, but if we comparing current situation with the Cold War, during that time, the US and the Soviet Union was two blocs, of course. The both countries led two blocs, and the two countries, the two blocs have two different confrontational ideologies. They want to prevail over the other side. And the two blocs have two military blocs or two military alliances, the Warsaw Pact and the NATO. And the two sides, the two blocs, has no economic ties. It was almost zero between the USSR and the USA. But today, I think the US is forming their own bloc, but I don't think there is another bloc. There's no another bloc like the Soviet-led bloc in the world, and also there's still a lot of linkage between countries like China and the US, and of course other countries. For example, as I said, the trade of the two countries reached the highest point, highest amount last year, China-US, and we have people-to-people exchanges, and we don't have ideology that at least China does not have an ideology that want to or China believe the US need to adopt China's ideology. We don't think so. So it's not another bloc. So, and even in the US, in the Western bloc, let me use this term, I think they have different ideas. The different countries have their different interests. We had quite a few diplomatic interactions with the European countries in recent months. Germany and France and the EU itself, and also some other, Spanish, Denmark, a lot. I think this kind of interaction is changing, to some extent, changing the European side's view regarding the China-US strategic competition. For example, the France President Macron made some interesting remark after his visit to China about Taiwan. Of course, he was criticized a lot in Europe, but I mean, we still believe Europe is have their own interest. They are now very emotional because of the conflict in Ukraine, but I think sooner or later they will take back their own strategic autonomy in the future. And India, is India in any bloc? I don't think so. And China and Russia, we are partner, but we are not a bloc. So I don't think there are already. I don't think it's already a bloc-based international order. Some countries, particularly the Western country, are trying to build their bloc, but China will not. That's my answer. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Da. The next question is from Colonel Banerjee.
Dr. Dawei, it was really an excellent presentation on a very critical topic confronting the world today. But may I perhaps request you to address India-China relations a bit?
Sure.
Thank you very much. As the president of the G20 this year, the summit is planned for September, and we are expecting the chairman to come to India to address this, to be present at the summit and address the issues confronting the world today. But in that context, do you think India-China relations have a chance to move forward? Currently, it seems it's stuck in a groove and not in a very positive place. In spite of numerous conferences, meetings, etc., problems still remain outstanding. What would you suggest for both sides to do or move forward in a particular direction or address issues now at an early date?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to answer a question about India and also, of course, get your question from India's perspective. I think China-India relationship is really, really important. I personally feel India is one of the most important country for China in the world and in the future. To your question, of course, I don't know if President Xi will, I don't know his travel plan, obviously, but I will say it's hard to imagine that Chinese leadership will be absent from a G20 summit. I think it's almost impossible, though I really don't know. I have no information about our president's plan, but I think if he's not in that summit, that will be a big news. I don't think it will happen. So I think he will be there. Having said that, I think China-India relations are really difficult. It's you know that very well. I think it's complicated, and we have this border disputes for decades. And we have in recent years we have several clashes along the border, and there are some kind of economic competition now between India and Russia. And China. I think that's something unfortunate and ridiculous. Two developing countries have kind of competition mindset. I think that's totally wrong. I don't want to blame either side, but I think maybe the two sides need to be blamed too. And China also feel we also have some suspicion about India's close partnership with the U.S. and Western country regarding military and regarding the Quad mechanism. We think that India is playing a negative role in that at the strategic level. So all those, the old border issue, the new economic competition, and the strategic relationship, I think are all very complicated. I don't think we can solve that problem in the short run. But I do hope that the two countries can lower the temperature on the border issue. The two military forces withdrew to the line of the control, because we cannot solve the border issue, but let's lower the temper and avoid any further conflict. If the border can be peaceful, then we can try to coordinate our economic policies. I think actually for China, some supply chain, if some supply chain move to India, it's not a bad thing for China. I think that's a win-win thing. But India need to stop viewing China as a strategic competitor. And China also need to be more open for this transitional supply chain in the world. That could be win-win. Strategic partnership with the West. That's something we need the Indian side to decide. That's not our affair. But I do believe that the India friend, India is an independent major power. I don't believe India will follow any other major power, but I think the India side need to have better communication and let us believe that India is an independent player, a respectful independent player in the world. That's difficult, I know, but to end my answer, I think there's no reason for China, India, two neighbors, two great countries, in a very hostile or a very unfriendly way. I think that's a tragedy for the two countries.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The question. Oh, I see
the Ide wants to ask something.
Yeah.
You are muted. Yeah.
You need to switch on your.
Yeah, just a second.
Yes. Hello.
Now it's
Do you
good.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I joined this meeting a bit late, but my question is about Japan-China relations. And I hope that Japan is still a good friend for China. And a few years ago, we waited for the visit of the President Xi Jinping, and we prepared very hard. But because of the coronavirus, the visit was postponed. But from Japan's perspective, somehow our relations are a bit cool these days. And also, I study Chinese matters in Japan, and Japanese scholars on China, they are afraid these days to visit China because many Japanese scholars were arrested in China. So somehow
many
relations...
are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
How many?
More maybe at least 6 or 7. And basically Japanese nationals were released, but Chinese nationals who have jobs in Japanese universities, some of them are still in Chinese prison. And so many Japanese scholars on China, they are afraid of visiting China. So it's not good situation. So I'm very much happy if you also participate in academic exchanges with Japanese scholars. And also, I wish somehow our relations should be activated. And maybe starting point is intellectual exchanges or academic exchanges. So I wish to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I will be in Japan in July with some Chinese, at least 10 Chinese scholars from different universities to Tokyo University and other institutions. So we are, by ourselves, we are trying to recover the academic exchanges between our two countries. Yes, China-Japan relations is in a bad shape, I will say. Particularly, yeah, you already said about the security concern from the Japanese scholar. Well, on China's side, China's viewpoints towards towards Japan has changed in recent 2 years. We believe that Japan has already passed the threshold of becoming a normal, so-called normal country. We think it's already too late. So if we can switch our clock back to 5 years ago, I think maybe we still have time to try to bring China-Japan relations back to the old normal track. But now I think it's too late. I think Japan has already passed that threshold. So if we want to stabilize, we want to improve China-Japan relations, which I really hope that happen. I think we need to, based on new reality, that Japan is moving towards a full-scale, full-fledged power, economically, politically, and militarily. I think it really needs some time for China to accept this reality. So in the foreseeable future, I think our bilateral relations will be difficult, and Japan is very active regarding Taiwan issue, which is so sensitive here in China. So all those attribute to the difficulties between our two countries. So I don't have any solution to that. But you mentioned people-to-people academic exchanges. Just like the China-US relations I discussed today, I hope China-Japan relation can be kind of manageable tension, I will say. The tension will be there, but I hope we have a boundary. I hope innocent people won't be arrested. But I don't know the scholar you mentioned if they are innocent or not. But from China's perspective, we believe they must violate some crimes. But of course, I don't know the information. But anyway, I hope that we can maintain the normal interactions. And I hope the two sides can control the situation in Diaoyu Islands. no clash. It's possible, but if we have a clash, that will be a disaster. And I hope we can stabilize our economic ties, which is also difficult. I think in the past, I think Japanese companies invest a lot in China, but I think its situation is changing, and China's automobile industry is speeding up. I think maybe in a few years will be a problem for Japan. I think all those are challenges from my perspective. So I don't know. I cross my finger, and I will go to Tokyo next month to talk to my Japanese friend in person, try to find a way to stabilize the bilateral relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm giving the floor to Professor Lukin.
Yes, well, we don't seem to have more questions, but we had quite a lot. You see, Professor Da, that your talk attracted a lot of interest, and not just in Russia, but in many countries, because you had questions from representatives of various countries. So thank you very much for your thoughtful comments and ideas. I hope to see you in person one day in China or Russia, or who knows, perhaps even in the United States. So thank you very much, and let's continue our cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Lukin, for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure talking to my colleagues from Russia and from other countries, from Europe, the US, India, Japan, and maybe from other countries that I don't realize. Thank you very much. And I hope this kind of interaction can continue and have more interactions in the future. And I really look forward to meet you in person in no matter Moscow or Beijing or somewhere else. And other participants, if you have travel plan to Beijing, please let me know, and I welcome you to visit Tsinghua University and my center. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.